Today, I just wanted to share a story. Sometimes I think about the events I did in the past and, the stuff I enjoyed doing when I was a freelance technician way back in the day. And sometimes I'm tickle myself by the memories because it's like, wow, nobody's going to believe that. Well, guess what? I'm going to share a little story. It's pretty believable, but it's still, it kind of reminds me of why this is such a fun industry that we work in. So, bear with me while I reminisce a little bit. Welcome to your weekly dose of uncommon sense, helpful insights, and tough love. The Intentional Success Podcast comes to you through the generous support of Merch Crew. Merch Crew is the smart way to book quality AV freelancers and protect your business. Your choice, your rates. Merch Crew handles contracts, insurance, and payments so you save time, cut costs, and reduce risk. Start today at merchcrew.com. So my favorite thing about doing shows, and I'll come back to this at the end of the podcast, but I love solving problems, right? I think solving problems are great, and shows, whether it was in theater when I was growing up or in college doing theater and building scenery and directing shows and acting, we're always solving problems. And sometimes the problem is the person across from you forgot their line and you've got to change your lines to fill in the narrative. But I also love working with cool people and cool people behind stage, on stage, around the business. I've met a lot of really neat folks in my life, and I cherish their memory and the experience of working with them. And many of them are still actively working in the show business. And I'm a guy who left doing shows quite a long time ago, and I've been on the periphery in the management side for decades. But, back in the day, I was out there schlepping gear, moving sliders, just like many of you are. I like hearing great speakers. I've heard some wonderful speakers. I have a great story about hearing a gentleman named Tom Peters, who was a famous business writer back in the 90s. And he spoke at an event, and it was inspiring. I think I cried. It was so awesome because he told a story about the AV guy who helped him out on a really bad day when he had just learned that his mother had died, or maybe that was the story, but something tragic had happened. And it's things like that stick with you, and you go, wow. That was a moment that person shared with me, and I got to stand there, look in his eye, shake his hand, and hear that story. We get to visit exotic locations, and sometimes it's exotic simply because you haven't been there before. I'm going to talk today about the one show I did in Destin, Florida, which is on the Gulf side of white sand beaches and resorts, which at the time of year we were there were absolutely empty, but that's part of the story. And the last thing that I think is really important about why we do shows is that you often leave with a memorable moment. Maybe it was, somebody on the team being successful at something they hadn't tried before. Maybe you solved a problem you didn't know you could solve. Maybe you were just in the room when it happened. But these are all fun things. So the story I think about is this show in Destin, Florida, and this was sometime in the 80s, and it was, I still had a lot of freelance career ahead of me, but it was a small show, probably 100 people in the audience, if not that much, at a resort that was otherwise, I don't know what time of year it was, but there was nobody there. The beaches were empty. The restaurants were closed. The funny thing is we ate at the same restaurant every night because we had to get away from the resort because the food was bad and it was really expensive. And so we went to the same restaurant every night that had fantastic onion rings. That's what I remember about that. But here's the story. We got in there to set up the show. It had a little bit of video on there. My buddy Danny was doing the video on it. I, for some reason, was doing audio, which sometimes, I did. I did a little bit of everything, but when in doubt, you could throw me on audio for a speaker-only event. And a longtime friend, but he was new to me on that show, John, was the scenic and lighting guy. And he brought in some carpet and some stage sets and the lights. And, the three of us working together with our favorite producer, Nancy. And we were out there, no stagehands, just us. I don't even know how the gear got there, if we had a driver. I don't remember any of that at all. But I remember getting this whole setup. I can't even tell you who the show was for because the story is about who spoke. So there were two speakers besides the client, the corporation. I imagine this was a sales meeting of some sort because that's a lot of what we did back in the 80s. And they had brought in some guest speakers, and the keynote speaker was legendary football player, Nick Buoniconti. And Nick had been on the speaking circuit for a while. He is one of the first NFL players that really embraced that in his post-player career. He was going out doing motivational speaking. And honestly, he continued to do that well into his old age. And, he was still out there talking in 2010, as far as I remember, passed away in 2019. So he was the keynote speaker, and I don't remember him at all. I knew he was famous. I knew he was important. I knew that, salespeople are always excited when a sports figure comes and talks to them, and that was a neat thing. But he brought along with him a secondary speaker, somebody who was on their first gig ever as a speaker, a former NFL football player, had quite a few Super Bowl rings. He sat behind me while Nick was speaking, and I was at the console. This, at the time, young man, he was probably in his late 30s, was sitting next to me, watching what I was doing, asking questions, leaning in, wanted to know what the knobs did, was marveling at everything. This was a real simple show. But it was a nice show. It was a nice little complete, show with some scenic treatment and everything. And he just thought he just hit the big time. And he went up and did his presentation, and he did a lovely job. But I just remember sitting there with him for that 45 minutes, answering his questions. And I knew who he was. He was Terry Bradshaw. He had just retired. Wildly famous now, but at the time, he was nobody off the football field. And he was like a kid in a candy store. And it was just a pleasure to enjoy his excitement and energy about this new career he was launching. This was before he became a sportscaster and everything else. And he was going to do motivational speaking, and it was awesome. Yeah, it's cool to meet celebrities. That doesn't excite me as much as it does some people, but meeting anybody who was enthusiastic as Terry was about what he was about to encounter, and knowing what he went on and did, in his career afterwards as a broadcaster, I'm just tickled that this was his first speaking gig, and I sat next to him and explained how things worked, and chit-chatted with him and made sure that he was comfortable with what he was about to get ready to do. And as I recall, he went up there and knocked it out. He did a great job, right? He is a guy that doesn't have a lot of fear of standing in front of people and barking commands or sharing ideas. So anyway, having a memorable moment, having a memory about an event like that is part of why we do this thing. And I think it's helpful sometimes if you share those stories with your team, of your experiences. There's, I'm Ray. I have nothing to do with Terry Bradshaw's success. It's very humbling, to know that I got to sit with him, when he was a nobody in the seat that he was in now, but he had been everything, just a few months before on the playing field. So awesome times, good stuff to remember. I also remember, of course, working with, John and Danny and Nancy, and how much I adore those people and still do, and how great they were to work with. And I feel like I could walk into a show with those people and another handful of people that I know well from that era, and that we could probably walk into a show, all fall back into our normal roles and do a bang up job. Well, perhaps if we weren't all old and decrepit and we had a lot of hands to do the heavy lifting for us. But good times, good memories. Remember why you do this. You do this because you love doing shows, helping other people get their shows done, doing their work for them in an environment where you get to solve problems. You get to work with great people that you love. You hear some wonderful speakers and presentations. You hear some crap too, but okay. remember the good times. You get to go to some fun places and you get to see some things that you wouldn't otherwise see. And you leave, holding a memorable moment on almost every job where you want to hold on to that memory and say, I was there when it happened. And, as I talk about this, I could rattle off another 20 stories that I remember I was there at that moment, and it kind of makes it all worthwhile. So thanks for bearing with me while I reminisce. You guys should reminisce some more. Share some stories with each other. I'd love to hear your stories. Reach out. Tell me about them, particularly if, they're really old ones. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being there. Thanks for making it possible for me to enjoy all the aspects of my career over the years. Okay. I look forward to seeing you. If this episode of the Intentional Success Podcast has made an impact on your day, then please leave a review and don't forget to like and subscribe. This podcast has been brought to you by the helpful folks at Mertz Crew.